Well, hello everybody. I'm back here with Patrick Science. We're going to discuss a bit more anthroposophy, spiritual science from the Rudolf Steiner point of view. So, Patrick, welcome. And what are your thoughts for today?
Well, the question asked, what is technosophy, which I've tried to address before. In a way, there's a problem which is similar to the problem that Leonardo da Vinci had in his life. His thoughts were way ahead of the materials science of that time. Now we've worked with metals and heat and all kinds of processes which, had they been available at the time, he would have been able to fly. But because of the nature of our modern science, with like most of our planes now aluminium, which is a very light metal, very workable in all sorts of ways, which certainly would have helped. Also, of course, at that time they didn't have any what I call fire-based machines, neither steam engines and certainly not internal combustion engines, and all kinds of flight require that kind of power, except, of course, gliding. But you usually have to get your glider up there, and usually it's a plane that manages to get it up there. Leonardo did make gliding devices which, to a certain extent, worked for a certain distance, and he did submarines and things like that. He did all these things, but the actual other areas of science hadn't caught up with his ideas. And that's the same with technosophy. Technosophy cannot be realized at this time. It can be conceived, and it's the actual conception of it, the thoughts about it, that make it, that will make the Earth, put the Earth in a condition where it will become more and more possible to manifest it. I mean, the real difference between technosophy and technology, and we could say in some senses that technology will cause its own destruction, that without another influx it's on a course of destruction. You look at the nuclear, what it does to people, how it kind of impels them to make things more and more and more, and it's a kind of blind drive to make more and more devices. And for the Internet of Things, you're putting more and more of your agency into the hands of the machine. It's investing in it in an overdone way, denying the possibility, because it's based upon a paradigm which doesn't have any sense that the human being is actually evolving. This kind of science comes from a particular paradigm, the materialistic paradigm, which has within it the idea that there's no life after death. There's nothing else but the physical. If you have those ideas, and that everything you do comes out of those kind of ideas, that will eventually bring about its own destruction. It's got it built into it. It's not to say that we shouldn't have been through materialism. We have to go through it. It's a very important thing. We do have to take hold of matter, but we have to take hold of it with a new understanding of the agency that can arise out of the human being and the human being's development, which is tied up with, of course, the concept of life after death, which is tied up also with the idea of reincarnation. And the greatest processes that happen within our universe are the transmutation and transformation of the human being between lifetimes, bringing down new thoughts, new forms of activity from the higher dimensions. Of course, if you're a materialist, you don't think they exist. It's all nonsense. You believe that it's all random, it all come about by chance, which of course is illogical, absurd, because if you look at every process of construction in the physical world, everything we have made it. It's not just come about out of its own accord, which is what they're implying in the intricacy, far, far greater intricacy of a living organism to any machine. And of course, it's obvious why they hold these thoughts. They're afraid of them. The implications, if you think they're greater powers than us, and that we are part of a greater process, you're answerable to things beyond, this physical world. I've said this before in other recordings, but to go back to technosophy, one distinction is, you could say that technology is fire-based, very largely fire-based. Because all of the forging and casting of metals is based on great heat. We know all of the air and aeronautics are based on heat, jet engines, rocket engines, whether you're steel, making steel, casting, forging steel, all the alloys, all those things depend on excessively great heat, which is relatively new. It's taken time before we could have generate enough heat even to smelt metals from rocks. And then came the ability to cast, to make molten. Forging happened a bit earlier. Forging is based on the idea of you heat up a piece, not you make it red hot, and then you can bend it and shape it and form it, which you can't do when it's cold. But it's not casting because you haven't made it molten. Those are all processes in the history of material science, which we have now. And also the other element, which is very much goes with this heat principle, is explosion. A motor car is just a thing that has controlled explosions within it. Most of our engines are explosions, and sort of the kind of apotheosis of modern science is things like the hydrogen bomb. I mean, dozens of brains are involved in generating this device, this entity, which is, an ultimate expression of a climax of our technology. So we can see, and in a way, that's pointing to this idea that technology was a one-sided masculine principle. And it goes with the paradigm too. The whole concept of the evolution of the solar system is all about explosion and collision, which is what our technology is all about. It's all about push rather than pull. It's whereas technosophy emphasizes the strength of water, and it's very subtle. It's like saying within all living organisms either generate warmth or need warmth to function, to grow. So it's a much more a living principle. And technosophy would also see that it's gaining its impetus from forces that are super-terrestrial. It's not hurling the products of the earth, intellect, wrapped in materials dug up from quarries and forged in fire, and hurling them into space in the hope of finding some other world. It's making receptacles on the earth to receive cosmic wisdom. And this is based upon the idea and the thought and the understanding that the universe is full of formative forces, and higher wisdom that has brought about our evolution, that is guiding it. So it's like saying that the technosophical devices would be more akin to plants, in that plants receive photosynthesis from the sun, warmth and light, and cosmic archetypes for the different species. So a plant you can't make it, stick it together on the earth. It's something that needs a cosmic connection. So that's what technosophy would be. And another element of that is that it would be a new understanding of the things that will reappear, like Plato, the Platonic solids, these archetypal geometries, of which there are vast ramifications. When these used in a certain way will reconnect the earth with the cosmos in a way which will allow cosmic forces to come to the earth. And so and the other thing is also, if you take going back to the alchemical idea, you take the metals, you've got the noble metals, you've got the planetary metals, the central metals, you've got silver, copper, that's the moon and Venus, you've got iron, that's Mars, you've got the sun, gold, you've got tin and lead, and there's one more. Anyway, those metals are connected with the planetary forces. Now, you could say, oh, that's just an old-fashioned superstition. Well, not really. When you look at it, there is a relation between, for instance, silver and the moon. The moon is connected, it's like a reflector, or it's like a camera shutter. It's picking up things from the earth. And silver is connected with moon, and silver is connected with photography. So one could go much more deeply into that. And also silver, like copper, they're very great conductors of electricity and heat and resonance, and they have luster. As you go down through the spectrum of the metals, you get to the lead, the far end, which is a Saturn metal, which doesn't have luster. It doesn't really conduct electricity or heat very well. In fact, if you heat up lead, you find the end that you're heating up melts, usually before the thing passes the heat along. And the Saturn connection is very interesting there from a spiritual point of view, because Saturn it's a planet which prepares you to expand into the cosmos. It doesn't allow you really to go back. It's got a threshold thing, and it's very much connected with the centrifugal forces going out, and this is not unrelated to the lead's resistance to radioactivity, to the Earth's terrestrial forces. So, and each level has a different, and this is also connected with the angular velocity. The Saturn circle of its orbit covers a tiny distance where, in terms of angular velocity, and whereas you look at the orbit of Mercury, this is the opposite end. It goes all 360 degrees in a very, very small distance compared with what Saturn does, and this is very much connected with the nature of how the metal works. So there are all kinds of connections, and that's what technosophy would take these into account. It would look at the qualitative forces coming from the planets, and for instance set up on Earth using Platonic geometries, which also brings in the Fibonacci series and the golden section. Like for instance, you take a golden sphere of a certain, and you'd weigh it a certain weight, and the weight of that sphere relative to a sphere of iron representing the Earth would be exactly the same as the weight of the Sun to the Earth. And you do all the planets, you put them round, and they'd all be proportionate to the actual weight and to the distances. If you set that up, if you could do that in the right way, you'd set in motion forces which would activate the Earth's etheric body, and also it depends very much on technosophy. Is very much about time, the time when you put a manifestation out on the Earth to receive particular things, rather than the arbitrary thing, we're going to send a rocket up anytime, just when we're going to send it up. There's no rhythmical connection with the universe, because that's not believed in anyway. That's all seen to be a fantasy. So technosophy would also do that. I mean, one of the early manifestations of technosophy, in a way, beginning, is the flow form. The idea, that you make these sort of dishes which are connected really with the spinal column. As the spinal column go from the cervical to the thoracic to the lumbar, you see gradual changes of the form. It's coming down into gravity. So also with these dishes, they are, and then you pour water into them, and it sets up a pattern in the way that the dish, to make a sort of figure of 8, which is also connected with the caduceus, the undulating, meandering of the caduceus serpents. You make that, which is a transformation of lower astral forces in the water. That's why ideally those water flow forms can work on pathogenic microorganisms which arise out of fallen astrality that is disconnected from the cosmos, or it's either become, as Steiner would say, luciferic and aromatic, and that's what makes pathogenic manifestations possible.
So with a technosophist scientist, they wouldn't be trying to split the atom, because that's more destructive. That's not working with something. Where what you're describing is that this kind of science would be working with all the different elements of the cosmos, the Earth, working together and making trying to work towards a harmony. So I found that quite interesting when you were saying about if everything was of a certain weight and balance, then we would get certain forces. So is that because everything's kind of out of sync at the moment, that it's not working?
Well, you make so if you do this thing with various spheres, you make a microcosmic image, exactly the same balance of the macrocosmic reality. So
So you could set something like that up in your own room if you knew how to measurements were. And then sit in it or something, and then hopefully help to transform yourself. But you'd have to be properly prepared mentally, physically and emotionally, wouldn't you? Otherwise you could, like these people that set off their Kundalini and they're not ready and it burns them out.
I mean, the thing is, you talk about splitting the atom. This is the whole thing. What it is actually, technology is about synthesis, not about analysis. It's not about splitting and breaking apart. I mean, what really happens in the stuff with atomic bombs and hydrogen, what's really going on is that they're penetrating the world of the thrones that lay their will into the material basis of the Earth without the moral development of those beings. I mean, that's, if you develop high morality as high as those hierarchical beings, radioactivity would have no effect on you. In fact, you could neutralize it. And it's an example of the premature, we want power and intellect, we want to know before we have the goodness, before we have that understanding of the whole universe as something to do with love. And if you don't have that as a plan, and you go purely, motivation is purely to make something to destroy other human beings, and that's going to cause terrible destruction. You're releasing something that you're not ready to release, which in its place eventually will be, only when we've got the power, when our will is in tune totally with the cosmic plan, then we can do that. But that was done nothing to do with, that was a localized human thing about power over another part of the earth. That's why, and that will cause destruction. That's why Steiner constantly points out, you have to have, for every step in knowledge, you have to have these 3 steps in moral development. You have to have that feeling for the whole purpose of the earth and the sacredness of life. And if you don't have that, then what you release will eventually be incredibly destructive. And what it's saying is that way of thinking, is eventually got to be transcended. And in a way, the whole Manhattan Project was an example of the supremacy of that kind of thinking, which produced it, which was a thinking that was really disconnected from any real understanding of the cosmos, even though many of those people in that group, so-called astrophysicists, some of them, thought they knew what was there. And always said this, they think they know what's out there and think they know what's not there, and they don't. And that they will lead them into certain conclusions. So they're guided by beings that have already separated themselves from the cosmic purpose.
And so we're not working with the divine plan.
Exactly.
Because a lot of people are very worried, scared by these scientists, for example, the Manhattan Project scientists, and who's still doing crazy projects now. So I find a lot of people that feel like it's a big spiritual battle, but at the same time they need to go to war with these scientists, where I think that's we can perhaps try and get them to awaken to their conscience, but we don't want a physical battle, do we? Because otherwise that's going against the harmony.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it's a Michaelic thing. It's a battle of the ideas and thoughts, really, that must counter them. The whole, I mean, all over the world now, you've got the CERN, you've got NASA, and you've got these places like Caltech and the MIT. They're all have an agenda. Some of them think they're working, good out of the good, and they're maybe good souls, but they're still misled to a certain extent by this idea of what the universe is and isn't, the paradigm. And that's the really difficult thing. I mean, you can't really make people accept this, or the world will not be ready until there's a complete change of mindset about what we are, where we've come from, where we're going, what our potential is. And that's a big ask. I mean, there are the ideas of modern science, the great so-called leading concepts about the nature of astronomy and the solar system, all that stuff has to be questioned. And my view is that, we really, when we're looking at those things through our telescopes, we're actually looking at vast collective consciousness phenomena reflected in the universe, like black holes and dark energy, dark matter. That's all to do with us. And a lot of, I would say, it's quite radical, I've said it before, that dark matter and dark energy are really connected with those souls that have crossed the threshold with a complete denial of spirituality, and they become a kind of dark manifestation in the cosmos. I mean, when we die, we definitely expand. We become a part of the cosmos. We become much more participatory. Our inner life goes out and becomes an outer thing in a sense. And that's what is perceived through an Ahrimanic materialistic consciousness as purely sort of physical, but it isn't. There's nothing out there that isn't actually imbued with psychic forces, which are the product of human beings coming in, going out, and all the things we've done throughout history. That's in there. It's in what we call the universe. It isn't just a vast empty space with gravity and little planets dotted here and there and stars. That's the what I would call the abomination of desolation. It's not, it's.
You've never discussed that with me before, so this is quite fascinating for me because dark matter is growing, isn't it, at
Oh
quite a
yeah, yeah,
phenomenal
yeah,
rate, and that would make sense if it is all the,
yeah.
well, it would be their souls or their
Well, yeah,
spirits of
it's
those
going
people.
out there. It's like going out there with no sort of spiritual, inner spiritual thoughts, but a lot of denial of it. And I said before this idea that even black holes to me are a kind of image of a kind of nihilistic atheism. And it's a very powerful thing. Atheism as it crosses the threshold, the denial of the higher worlds. It's and it's interesting that Stephen Hawking kind of recently, before he died, talked about Hawking radiation. Something can get out, but it's ultimately it's only the consciousness of the human being, and imbued and helped by the divine forces that can get out. Without that, then this thing is something that consumes all light. It's I've had arguments with atheists, extreme, and it's like literally pouring your thoughts down a plug hole. You can't. There's nothing that convinces them. It's like they're actually completely. That they've made their decision. It's not to do with thought and logic. They made their decision.
Yes, they're closed-minded. They're
Yeah,
not
yeah,
willing
yeah,
to try and
yeah,
think outside of their own box.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I did want to ask you something, which you don't have to answer if you don't think there's an answer to it, because what you was talking about with the ape sphere, and we would also briefly said about CERN. Do you think there's a connection between CERN and the ape sphere and the Hadron Collider?
Well, yeah, I think yes, I do. I think I think I said it before. This idea that in a way those forces would like to make a collider that's all around the world, one ring around the world, one ring to take them all. It's like this from Lord of the Rings. There is a sort of parallel with that, and the whole concept that they're going back to the Big Bang. They're trying to reenact the first moments of the Big Bang. All that stuff is, it's a misconception on a vast scale. What they are doing is working in a way. It's like with quantum mechanics. They are working with electricity, and they're doing all kinds of things with it. And in a sense, they are building a structure, a kind of theoretical superstructure out of these forces, because they think that those forces are the only and most important and permanent forces of the universe. They think that those forces underlie everything, and they do lie under everything, and they're underlying, and they're lies basically. It's not. They are fallen forces. They have a place. They're in our organism. They're all there, but they're not the supreme forces of life. And because they think they make this big mistake. They're living organisms. They've got etheric bodies, people who work at CERN, and they've got egos. But in a way, all their work is a kind of theoretical denial of any of those realities.
But they're being affected, aren't they, by the dark
Oh,
forces,
well, yes,
like
yes. I mean,
tacitly or
their soul.
subtly?
Whether some might eventually move away, get converted, and have Damascus experiences, but some of them will become real kind of disciples of and forces for the Ahrimanic. They may not realize it now. That's the whole thing. It's people do things when they don't know the full implications. They still live with they live with all the soul support of hundreds, centuries of people developing soul and spiritual forces. To give us our sense of well-being today. They're all around us. At the same time, you're theoretically denying the very thing you're feeding off. You're very fact. I say I don't believe in God. I don't believe in God. Is actually the only thing that makes you capable of saying that is the existence of God. If you know what I mean, that's the whole. You're literally biting the hand that feeds you.
Well, this is one of the things I'm concerned about, people that are only in the last few years coming to discover there's a spiritual war going on, a spiritual battle, or waking up because of the last few years. But I find that they want to go to war. Like some people say, I want to break the matrix, rather than to try and fix themselves first.
Yeah.
And they give me the whole, which is I used to be. I want to save everybody, but it took me a long time to realise I need to look after myself first, get myself balanced first, so that I can then go and help other people. Maybe you could speak on that a bit.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's very obvious in a sense. We have agency, and that's the most important thing. That what we do has an effect, whether it's in the life now or even after death. What we've done will have an effect. It will become a force in the universe. And that's what those dark forces want to say. You're nothing, you don't have any, you're just a walking robot of flesh and blood, and you've got no real agency. The best thing is just to obey us and do what we say, and we'll tell you what's right and wrong. Whereas actually the real thing is that in every soul there is the capacity to create. Then the great statement, to those that overcome a crown of life, which is really means, in other ways, the crown chakra opens, which becomes the creative force from the cosmos to the earth through the human being. What human beings, the great souls that pass over into the spiritual worlds are immense forces. They become tremendous powers. Half of the good things in the world today are there because of great souls have passed and endowed, given their essence to the universe, and then they come back and reincarnate, and it's whole.
Well, this is the kind of thing we should be working towards. I'm not saying this from an ego point of view, but we're trying to be the better person, ready to help others once we've balanced ourselves out. I often say we want to be a good Jedi rather than a bad Sith Lord.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in a sense, yeah. The interesting thing is that when you are, you work in the realm of white magic. People say, oh, the Sith or the black magician is more powerful. In a way, he is up. In a way, but the only reason is because he doesn't have to connect with the subtle rhythms of the heart. I mean, it's this comparison. Why does Ahriman with his electricity zips around the world? Only does because he doesn't have to take into account the vast spectrum of rhythms and states of existence that need to be gradually lifted up. And that the being who is doing the lifting up is taking 10 million times more weight than Ahriman. In that sense, Ahriman is like the psychopath. He doesn't have to take into account, people's feelings. That's why he can move so fast. He's got no, and that's what people are so hung up on. They think, oh, it's so brilliant, it's so brilliant. It's only brilliant at the expense of something much greater and much deeper.
Well, I was actually talking to someone just the other day about how it's kind of what you've related to what you've just said about how negative thoughts are very quick, or negative emotions are very quick. Hatred happens quickly and then just escalates very fast.
Yeah.
For an example, or negativity or something. So maybe we could speak on that a little bit.
Yeah,
Why does that happen?
Well, partly because it disconnects from the wholeness of your being. That's why it can be thrown around. It's like you can act separate. I mean, these people who are, say, hitmen and various people who take on work that is very close to being psychopathic. It's precisely because you're denying a lot, that you're casting off weight, and you're just, you're living in this buzzworld where you can do anything because your conscience isn't working. And conscience always holds you up. It makes you think. It stops you in your tracks. It's asking for more from you than just that. I mean, Shakespeare writes about it a lot in his plays. The conscience of Macbeth is that's the great struggle in him. Gradually it's abandoned, and then what happens? But yeah, I mean, so-called speed of things, and people get hung up on it. They think you're really getting somewhere, and people get hung up on vehicles. I mean, I think these people have these big sports cars that can drive around revving up all over the place. I mean, that's saying I'm powerful, I'm fast, I've got this thing, it's me. And it's based on a deep fear, an existential fear. What am I? It's
Yeah, because everyone wants to be known, don't they?
Yeah,
Everybody does
yeah,
deep down. We'd all like to be recognised.
Yeah, this thing for fame, because you're not really, you haven't really seen the true value of what the human being is, or yourself. And of course the time, I mean, it is this activity of the Ahrimanic which is based on denying true value in the human being. And then, of course, if that's there, and it's taught mainly in schools in a sense that they don't have an understanding of how to bring about a sense of true self-worth. So obviously you have to constantly get reinforcement, and then you get things like selfies, totally obsessed with the self, and all sorts of ways, and the so-called influencers that feel their existence because they've got thousands of people watching them. This desire for fame is to climb out of this anonymity, which is, denying any true worth. As people grow up, often they grow out of that, but the danger is very great now for all sorts of reasons.
I wanted to just go back to something you was talking about at the beginning, the thrones. Now, many people get all the different hierarchies mixed up. Could you just for describe who the thrones are or what they are? Are they still about for us to connect with, or have they done their sacrifice? Please talk about the thrones.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, of course, there are the 1, 2, 3 hierarchies. The lowest, so-called lowest hierarchy is the angels, the archangels, and the archai, which are much more present in their activity on the earth. Then you have the exousiai, spirits of form, dynamis, spirits of motion. Then you have the spirits of wisdom, the kuriotetes. And then the next one, on the third, something called the first hierarchy, you have the three, the thrones, the cherubim, the seraphim. And the thrones are cosmic will. Their whole activity was to lay their will, sacrifice part of their will for the very foundations of the earth, where all other beings could, in a way, feed off it and develop their own will and their own agency. And that is only given back eventually at the end of the world cycle of evolution, be recognized as this great thing that's been given. But if you try to tap into the will of the thrones without going through the inner development, to the Christ consciousness, without going through forgiveness, love, if you try to get hold of that power, then you will produce devastation. That's what this premature entering into cosmic power by human beings is extremely dangerous. And that's what's happened to a certain extent in the things like atomic bomb, hydrogen bomb, all these things that are being done with weapons is working into that realm where you see machines which have a will, seem to have a will far greater than the human being. Once you set in motion, you've invested will. Just as in AI, you invest intelligence and you give it over. In the world of machine guns and all those explosions, all those highly destructive, you have invested this energy, your own will into that, which should be actually where our will is, where the thrones are waiting for our will to harmonize with the will of the divine plan. Eventually, when our will becomes one with the will of the thrones, which is in tune with the divine plan, then we will arise above our own state of death.
Well, that's wonderful, because actually, from a dark point of view, I've just finished reading a book called Maniac, which is all about John von Neumann creating the first computers. And it was like, they say he was taken over. He couldn't leave the computers alone. He would often be found at night just staring at the computers. He was doing his thing. So it's like his will was taken over to help develop the computers, like the computers did it to him. But we don't want to have that kind of will, do we? What you're describing is a much more, a higher version of the will. And of course, a lot of the magical orders discuss will. It's for Aleister Crowley. It was all about developing your will. That was higher than love to him.
Yeah, that's a great danger. I mean, that is a sign of that you're moving into the world of black magic when you put will over love. You have to have the love to will and the will to love, but not just will over love, because then you are on a very dangerous path. I mean, that's so much so, which goes even with sort of manifestations of autism, when people get locked into a particular one-sided thing and then, caught. Many people are having their will gradually drawn out of them, and this is what we have to wake up to, the will that is in tune with the cosmic purpose. That is very, very rare to find that. I mean, you find it with human beings who stand up against power, misuse power, who sacrifice their lives for that. There are examples of that, and that is really when you've put your will close to the will of the divine plan. Very few non-Christians do that. I mean, you find that in some religions they'll martyrdom, but they'll take a lot of other people with them. That's not true martyrdom. That isn't, dying for the world. That is, once you start killing other people in your great suicide, you're not, that's invalidated. But most of the Christians, most of those who died for the world were Christians. They come out of that impulse, even though it may not yet reach the highest level of esoteric Christianity. From the point of view of heart, it's totally in the right direction.
Well, you've been running some cafe conversations on every other Saturday at Rudolf Steiner House. If anyone wants to come along, do look at the website for the dates. But what are your upcoming topics for this year?
Well, we've got three more. I think we've got one is tomorrow. We're doing one on metamorphism. And I say there's metamorphosis and metaformosis. They're two concepts of change, really, which are everywhere. So you're looking at that principle, how things change and form.
What does the word meta mean?
Well, it is to do with the conditions, the condition of that is, and then how it goes through a morphs. You know, it changes. The morphic means total change, really.
But I'm only asking because that's what Facebook is now known as, and his whole system
Oh
is
yeah,
called Meta. So I wonder if he's used that as a particular word to use.
I think he's coined out. I mean, I think he's trying to take things from, he sort of steals things really from bigger ideas.
But it could be the transformation of getting everyone to become avatars online.
Well,
so we all get
because
stuck indoors.
that's what they want to do. They want to mutate human beings. That's a very powerful impulse. Most of them are not fully aware of what they're doing. I mean, that famous saying, "Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do." Yeah. Most of them don't.
Or as my ex used to say, "Forgive them, for they are stupid." Bit harsh.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it can be. I mean, but that's one. That'll be tomorrow, and that would look at all sorts of things. Then there's one on. There's another one on. The last one's eros, philia, and agape.
So the different loves.
Yeah, and then the other one is on. The other one is also on the changing bodies, how the different bodies change, and we go through, which is rather like what we're studying in the study group, effects of spiritual development on the different sheaths of the human being. But they open out, and they go everywhere. We start out, I give a little spiel, and then people come in with their contribution.
Well, it's a conversation in the
cafe.
Well,
yeah, it's a conversation. Often it's people telling you, "Oh, I got up this morning, and, made my cup of tea, and then I thought, so it can get a bit." But
I'm sure it's much deeper than that, really.
Oh, it is. I mean, there's some interesting people who come along. It's good. I mean,
It's going well, and also we've got on June the 14th. I'll just do a little plug there that you and I are going to do an afternoon on the Ape Sphere at Rudolf Steiner House. So do come along if you want to know how to. What it is, how to avoid it and not to fall into it. It's going to be a good afternoon. Well, I'm going to thank you very much, Patrick. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we end?
I can't think of anything in particular.
Apart from spread the love?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah.